You're good.
Let it rip. Oh, we can start without Rich, but Rich Weiss will be joining us. Do we want to go through introductions on who's all in the room now?
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay. Go ahead, Chairman.
Jeremy Smith, Controller for Valley.
Randy, Vice President of Ops.
Mark, CEO, still here.
Steve Flater, IT Manager, still here.
Tara Brayster, I'm the Transit and Storage Business Development Manager.
Mike Smith, IT.
And Rich Wise, Executive VP, will be in shortly.
Okay.
Did we get Travis to join us?
Thanks, guys. Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, I was asking if Travis was in the room as well.
Travis is on PTO today. That's why we wanted this recorded.
Gotcha. I'm starting the recording of the warehouse management section now, so we're good.
Awesome.
All right, guys. So Angie and I here, we're kind of flipping back and forth as we go through this. But I'll try to give you an overview of the WMS and things inside of Dynamics. Just obviously a little history. This was a module that Blue Horseshoe had developed back in 2012, and we got a lot of customers up on it. Microsoft took notice and put it in the base product as we designed it really as a best-of-breed WMS, but embedded inside of Dynamics. At the end of the day, the value proposition here, which you'll hear me say a couple of times as we look at inventory and processes and business process, is that this is a single database, which is obviously going to be unique to the systems that you're looking at right now of WMS for the long term. So, as you look at inventory, there's one source of the truth of inventory. When you're customer service, if you wanted to drill down and see who, when, and why something was picked, or you're researching issues, it's all in one place. And so, as you'll see today, I'm in the same thing that I've been, the same system that we've been showing the whole time. We just have another module here down to the side that's called Warehouse Management, and we'll just kind of go through and talk to you essentially how that is incorporated to the rest of the processes inside of Dynamics. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Steve, I have a question.
Yep.
I wanted to squeeze in the segue there. You had mentioned there's a lot of customers running this. Do you have a total tally as far as how many customers are actually running this in production currently?
No. I mean, Microsoft's had it for many years. It's global. So we could go ask Microsoft and see if they had it, but I mean, it's being implemented by all the partners, thousands and thousands of partners across the world. China, Germany. We have our offices in Amsterdam are doing it, here in the States. So it's a global module used by the 20, 30,000 plus customers that are on the Dynamics platform. So it's going to be a pretty good number. I don't know what it is offhand. We could try to figure out if Microsoft could provide that.
Would you have a count of how many you implemented while you guys actually owned the module?
I guess, yeah, we could give you that. It was back in 2012, so I don't know how relevant that is to, before we sold it, but it's been 5 years, 6 years since they've owned it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess we can, I don't know if we have that data. We'll give that to Bill and see if he can do some research.
Yeah, we're just curious. It's a curious question.
Yeah, it's going to be like, ultimately, it's going to be hundreds of customers. Is going to be the answer, because we could try to figure out how many we've even just interacted with. So Mike, you could take that down as a follow up, and we'll at least try to give some factual statistical data that we have.
Got it.
That'd be great. We'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. So let's just start. I assume there's some new folks in here that haven't seen anything yet. Is that right?
No,
We've all experienced.
Oh, okay. Okay. Good. So let's just, and maybe everyone's seen this already, but I'll just start here. So again, the operational infrastructure of Dynamics is, obviously multi-company, multi-currency, those types of things. So I'm looking at an organization. I got my companies here in this layer. If I go over to my USMS company, which I'm working in right now, and I drive into Site 2, I can see I got various warehouses. Warehouse 24 is where I'll be doing most of my work today. And inside Warehouse 24, I've got setups, and then I've got locations and things. So nice, this as you kind of look at how we maintain inventory, through the organization, across companies, inside a site. So I may have multiple facilities on the campus, and then within the site could have multiple facilities, and then obviously within a facility I've got locations and license plates and various levels of inventory we'll get into as we go along. The first thing I wanted to kind of just go through is just core configuration and things. Sometimes it's easier to just kind of walk through some concepts here, and then I'll show you them. So let's just talk about what this looks like. This is a standard, sort of facility. You guys have zones here as well, but it's like, need the support of picking locations and drive and dock doors inbound and outbound, picking lines, and all those different things. If you look at, a warehouse, you track inventory in different ways in different locations. You have different size locations. You have a lot of parameters that you need to control at different levels. So, the first thing is obviously defining the warehouse and, whether or not you're going to use essentially the advanced WHS. So the nice thing is like if I have cross-dock facilities where I don't want to turn all this functionality on, I don't have to. It can kind of operate like a traditional ERP and just print out pick lists. But if I have a main distribution facility, I can turn on WMS for that facility, and then everything, it operates like a true WMS. So configuring this on and off is by facility. We have a location master. I'll show you that in a second, categorized by profiles, and profiles allow us to define the behavior of different groupings of locations. And then, we have further groupings of that and sort codes and zones and different things of that nature that allow us to understand. So I'll kind of show you how all that works. We have both, the system allows for both fixed locations and dynamic, so I can set up locations that's fixed to a specific product, which would help me drive, receiving potentially to a primary pick location if it was low, or replenishment through a primary pick location. But we also support dynamics, so if you have a changing business model where demand for different SKUs is changing all the time, you want a mix of both fixed and dynamic locations to drive potential replenishment. We support that as well. So both of those have different definitions. We'll get into the location profiles. Again, location profiles really give us that ability to define how each of these types will interact with the system, what we're going to track in each type of location, whether we mix things, what is the size, things of that nature. Then obviously group them into zones and groups, which help us with rules around where do I want to put things away from a put away perspective, where would I want to pick things from an allocation perspective, and things other than location by location level, right? We have full use of license plate, serial numbers, lots, all of those things. You guys already use license plates. I don't need to tell you what a license plate is, but that is a basic foundational concept to how we manage inventory in the system through receiving and put away, and then through our profiles we define what things, where we control, where license plates are managed and when they go away. So, for instance, in our picking location, we may want to no longer track license plate because it's overhead from a picking perspective, but I may want to track license plates in the rack or in a bulk location. We can control all that with the profiles. I'll show you that in a second. And then we'll come back and look at location and some of the rules and things. So again, that's sort of high level, so I'm going to drive into this. So again, I'm in the warehouse management module. I have full ability to do I'm basically full admin security here, but one of the first things to note is there's no coding here, right? This is how the system works. I go to my setup tab, and my setup is for an end user. So this is what, we talk about our methodology of helping you guys set this thing up. There's not an IT resource for this. We're going to go through and we're going to configure the warehouse through all these tabs with you guys so you understand how and why it's set up, and you're able to manage it every day as it goes along. So you want to blow that wall out. When you expand and set up new locations, you'll be more than trained to do those types of things. Somebody forks a rack and needs to put some things on hold, you'll be able to understand how to do that through the setup of the system. So if I go into the location setup wizard, it's doing a weird thing with my thing down there. There we go. So in my warehouse setup wizard, so the first thing is I can set up my location. So if I pick a warehouse and I pick a location profile ID, I can, so let me pick something more relevant here, like my cart and flow rack. You can see that it picked the format based on the profile. We'll look at the profile in a second. The format of how the location is numbered is based on the profile. So my cart and flow rack, I may have zone, bay, aisle, but, if I look at a floor location, I got some floor set up here. All I'm going to have is maybe what floor location and what aisle. And then I can set up to and from numbers and then, generate off a location master, right? So real easy way with the wizard to create your locations. You can upload them through Excel as well, right? So ultimately what you end up with is, as we look at, again, the setup, is you end up with a full location master, with location check digits, location profiles, and then all sorts of information about it in terms of capacity and current weight, current volume, last time it got counted, things of that nature. And then I can filter in here and start to look at things. And again, like I said, you can upload your locations to this just the same as we set them up through the wizard. So the next thing to look at here is the location profiles. So this is how we define how a location is going to behave, right? So I got a bunch of different profiles I configured here that are standard, just different things that you would have. So for instance, on your receiving dock, we're going to actually have a very specific behavior, right? My receiving dock, I actually want to use license plate tracking. I'm obviously going to allow mixed items, mixed statuses, mixed lots. I can have a specific, volume of that. In this case, it's infinite because I don't want to restrain my receiving dock. And then this is how this location profile will behave, right? Versus, a shelf location. I'll see if I have volumes in here. I don't. Or I could put volume of this location that could be usable, which would be nice from a put-away perspective, restrict the volume based on what can fit. I have a different format, and in this case, you can see like a good showing here that I don't want to track license plates anymore. So even if I have a license plate on a product I'm putting in, as I put it in, it'll go away. But in this case, I may still want to mix batches and things in one location. I can actually have some rules around how many days I can overlap in a location. So maybe I only let lots that are within 30 days overlap, things of that nature I can define at that location profile level. Make sense?
Yep.
Blocking and tackling stuff?
Where is your replenishment level set in there?
My replenishment level. Oh, okay. Yep, I'm getting there. So a couple of different. The couple of things. Number one is you can do replenishment level by fit, right? So if we wanted to do purely, so if I have a fixed location and I didn't want to go through and calculate that this thing fits one pallet or 9 cases, I could do it by cube and volume if my inventory dimensions are really accurate. The other way that works is essentially is if I look at this, I can go in and look at if I set up my fixed locations. So I have my location stocking limits and then my fixed location. So the first thing I can do is I can say, hey, in these locations, this is what product's going to be set up there, right? So here I've got, all right, here's my fixed locations. The second thing I can do when I do that is say, what are my location stocking limits? So I can say in my, maybe in specific location profiles, but then actually specific locations and cells. You can see today I just did this by profile, just saying, hey, certain floor locations I can fit 2 pallets, certain bulk locations, so maybe I only want to put 1 pallet in a rack. But on a fixed location and a specific item, I could go down to this thing fits 9 cases or 10 bags, right? So that defines, I think, what you're asking, which is, how do I limit how much it can fit from a replenishment perspective? That's where you would do it here. I can do that down to location level. And again, you can load this into the system or through Excel, or you can and then manage it here. Did I hit the question there, or does that make sense?
Well, it seems like a capacity in a way, but how do you trigger when it gets to a certain level to generate your replenishment?
You're saying in the pick bay?
Yeah, normally.
Yep, we're gonna get to all that. So there's rules around in terms of replenishment. When do I fire replenishment? Do I do it during the wave? Do I want to do sort of lean time replenishment based on a percentage? Do I just want to, when any time it goes below 50%, do I want to fire replenishment? We have all those methodologies. We'll get to that. So for now, we're just kind of going through the fundamentals here. But in general, that capacity will drive what it'll fit, and then we'll show you how you actually drive work into the replenishment policies. Okay. A couple other things here. So when you look at the setup inside the mobile device, so we can set up again. Inside the system, we configure the mobile device menu items. So these are all the menu items in the system, and we define how they work. So, I have specific type of menu items, but maybe I want them to work in different ways for different people based on what they do. So I'm able to basically, put together my RF menu and define what it's able to do. So for instance, I'm looking at purchase put away here. In a purchasing put away, am I generating a license plate or am I putting on a dummy one? Do I allow them to split the work into multiple locations? So again, you can see very configurable in terms of the behavior of how these mobile device menus work, all the way down to how do we confirm, right? So inside the system, I can set up, how do I confirm a put away? Do I do location to confirmation? Do I require quantity, lot, license plate, product, piece picking one by one, et cetera, et cetera. So configurable all the way down to the menu item and the work type, what we're actually accepting. So you can see this is a very sort of, rule-based, configuration-based model for how we put together a menu. So these are all the menu options, and then what you do is you configure those into menus. So in our menu, I've got inbound, outbound, inventory, production, and within inbound, I've got certain things that show up. So ultimately, if I pull up my warehouse gun here, I'll just pull up the menu itself and sign in. These menus align. I have authority to all of them. If all I did was a forklift driver and I did purchase and receive and put away, then that would be the only option that would show up on my particular RFID, right? So essentially, this is all configurable down to the user level in terms of how that works. Make sense?
Yep. Yes.
Right. The last thing is in terms of the workers themselves, we set up the worker, we default their warehouse, and then we can configure by user or groups of users. Like for cycle counting, can they? This is a supervisor that's allowed to approve these, or does this go to somebody to approve from accounting perspective? Are they allowed to override quantity and sales picking, or am I allowed to override a put away location? So person by person, profile by profile, I'm able to set that up and manage my users in terms of what they're capable of doing in terms of the security perspective, all the way down again to the RF level. And what options we actually give them to execute. Okay. Any questions on that so far? Any other sort of core setup things that I can go through that you haven't seen here yet? We can go through.
Oh, I think we're there. It sounds like the roles would be very similar to the other profiles you've showed us. So if you have a load picker, that user's configured specifically to his needs.
Yep, exactly. So again, if all I'm doing is outbound picking, maybe just looking at sort of, group picking or like a pick to box kind of function. I only have one thing, or if all I do is load trucks, I just have a loading option, right?
Yes.
And your RF is supported on everything, or just Androids, or?
It's supported on. It's basically you basically just have to have a browser based capability that we can download the app from Windows. So basically, with a Windows 10 operating system. So we can download the app. Okay. All right. So what I was going to do is really just kind of start. And by the way, I forgot to let me do this really quick before I pass this to Angie. A couple other things that are important is we showed you guys sort of the dimensions of the locations, right, which are important for certain things. In the same way, we got to be able to manage the dimensions, the physical dimensions of the actual product itself. So when we come out here, I forget where I'm looking here. Sorry. There we go. So if I'm looking at physical dimensions, I set these up by the unit of measure, right? So I can come in, set up what a case is versus an each versus a pallet. That obviously can drive, what's on a bill of lading, what fits in a location, those types of things. Another nice thing here is, I can drive those physical dimensions, to create those for specific, for how they pack versus how they store. So I can show this, I can, do nested things and things, which isn't as big a deal for you guys, but all the physical dimensions are stored there. Something you guys might not have seen a second ago is if I go to the item master, again, this is one of the huge advantages is, all in the item master, you're not segregated to a WMS item master. We're looking at the whole item master. We can use everything in the item master to drive our rules. There's a nice little warehouse section here where we can set up things that are specific to WMS, NFC codes, HTS codes, things of that nature. If I set this up in fixed locations, it'll show me where that is. We often find where we in the ERP, we have these long, beautiful descriptions to help our customers know what our product is, but on the RF gun, we want to be short and sweet, so we can set up WMS mobile device specific descriptions down here that'll show up on the RF device to the folks there, so they can see something that makes sense to them in a short amount of space on a smaller device. So all that we can control from the single item master inside of Dynamics. Okay. All right. So I'm going to pass this over to Angie, and what we're going to do now is we're going to start with inbound, then we're going to look at inventory and replenishment, and then we're going to go to outbound and look at the flows sort of in to out. So we'll start with purchasing, we'll talk about how we do put away and things of that nature, and then we're going to go into inventory and how we manage that, how we do cycle counting, tracing and things, and then we'll show you how we manage trucks and loads and work on the outbound side. Make sense? Thing to scan the first step here is when the purchase order shows up, we can back up and show you that. So you could print out, for instance, receiving worksheet with all the barcodes on it. You could scan off of that, and those types of things if you didn't have it, or you could pre-print some labels if you wanted to put some SKU labels on it.
Okay.
Okay.
And when you put in the item number, does it show a description? An item description?
Yeah, it's showing the description down here. It might even show a little bit more on the details. I named the description the exact same name as the item number.
Oh, okay. I got you. Okay.
I mean, it's actually got all sorts of things here. I mean, it's got photos, and you guys can put in images for these guys. So if they, if you would take photos of the case or the box or the label or things like that, we can put that all in here, so they can drill in and look. do some validation, right?
Okay.
I think maybe, Mike, were you asking if you weren't scanning, if the items would just come up, the original PO items that you could search through?
We'd have to type a lookup.
Right, so like, you know, if you go into the PO and you don't have, a lot of things we don't have that can scan, so do a lookup and so you can see all the line items that are on the PO and the item numbers, and then you could cycle through and choose the one through a menu.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to give them this PO view, you could do like in the full screen. It's not a full screen. I mean, these things can be shrink down to the tablet as well. If you want to give them access to the PO and just look through it, and we could design a screen that just had barcodes and stuff on it, that would be fine. You know, just depends if you want. If you know, a lot of times you want to put multiple people on it, you know, you want to maybe go label everything if it's not there, or you could also get the printouts and have the barcodes on with each guy with everything that they're expecting if it's all blind. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So at this point, I'm going to enter the quantity, and as you can see, the system is defaulted a unit of measure of case. That's based on my item setup.
You can change that, so if you get something else, or you got a pallet, you can change it. Unit of measure is all configurable.
Yep. So I'll scan a quantity of 2 here, and here's some verification, making sure I want to scan 2 cases of this in. Just going to select OK, and now I'm going to go ahead and assign a license plate to this product so that I can track it throughout the system or throughout the warehouse until it reaches my final put away destination.
So so again, we can pre-print the license plates if you want to do this, or we could actually, you know, send this to a printer so you do the receipt and then print what we call a smart license plate label that has human readable information on it, and then you go get it, or you can just do the rolls. I think that's what you guys do today. Labels have them with the receiver, and they just put that number on it. So I think, you know, either way, both kind of human readable license plate labels with a bunch of information, or just the rolled ones. We can support either flow here as you go in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, and because this is a lot tracked item, the system is going to prompt me for batch. That's how I have it set up. It can auto-generate that as well. But I'm just going to go ahead and scan a batch number and assign it. And I also have the system prompting me for expiration date if that's needed. So that's all configurable as well. So once I assign the batch number and the expiration date, the system is going to look at some configurations to determine a final inventory location for this item. So as you can see, the system searched through some rules that we have. It's telling us to go to this particular location, and I have verification set up for this. It's check digit. To make sure that I'm setting it down at the right location. So this is a non-human readable barcode at the location.
You guys have check digits today, or?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, and we just received the first line.
So as we go back to the PO now, one of the keys here is number 1, no integration. If we go into financials and inventory there at the bottom. On that product, the inventory drop down there. Top.
Line up here. Here we go.
So in here, like if we look at the, or actually update line, sorry. Update line. Registration, yeah. So if we look at the actual line on the PO, real time, we've received those 2 cases, right? So there's no interface. System already knows. I put those away, and they're sellable, right? So now inventory's done. We haven't, nothing's occurred. It's basically through the RF device, posted against this purchase order, a receipt. The next thing too is we back up, traceability wise, if I go into my purchase order, anybody in your company that has access to this purchase order, you look at that work details. So if we're using WHS, I go down to the line level and say, hey, what's the work details? You see the actual put-away transaction, that all of them that occurred on this line. So if I had multiple put-aways, they'd all be here. You can see in this that we're tracking both the pickup and the put down. So if I had a very narrow aisle here, I might have had multiple pickup and put downs to get that to its final location. Every one of those segments is tracked separately. If I go down, into one of those and go into the general tab and I look over, I actually see the specific amount of time. So it took Angie 25 seconds to complete that put away. We were talking while she was doing it. And that is tracked to her user, this product, this purchase order, in this lot on this day. And we also, you can see in the labor standards there had some estimated time that we can configure based on the type of transaction that we would have thought it would have taken us to put that away. So you can see here a lot of power in the data I can get from the buyer to the purchase order to the vendor to the line to the actual user on the floor that put this away, and then how long it took them to put it away and where they put it away to on what day, right, in one place.
Angie, I have a question. During your receipt of that product of those two cases, functionality-wise, did you switch over to a put-away, or did you do that during the receiving function? And
Yeah, I did.
okay,
Yeah,
is that product? Did you have to close the PO, or is that product ready to be picked?
So yeah, I did it just all in one action. We could split that up if we wanted to, and it is now available for sale.
So if we go,
you did not have to close the PO for it to be live inventory.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
And no, typically what we would do is when you guys, so let's say you go through all the receiving, all the lines. When you're done, you would be able to come out here and check the PO to see, hey, did I get everything? And then typically we'd run a packing slip process. The reason you would do that is say, hey, I'm done. It's easier for AP to run their three-way match if you group it all together in one document when you're all done. But as you do the process, it's live, ready to sell. You don't have to wait for you to receive the whole thing to do the packing list. It'll already know what you did. That's just a moment in time we're capturing. So when AP comes in and does three-way match, so we really did a nice job when we designed this to make sure that we allowed for speed of sale. Like to your point, I don't have to go through an entire truckload, get it all done to start selling it. I can do it as it's happening. But still be able to provide information at a summary level to AP so they know what they're paying for. Make sense?
Yeah, so you had mentioned at the end you do a total of the PO, so you've got a check and balance at the very end of the PO.
That's right. And if we go back to the menu options, I just wanted to address your other question in a little bit more detail. I think it's important. Like Angie, go back to the RF menu setup. This setup. Yeah. So within here, this is where we set up like the menu option. So if we go down to like purchase order, we have the ability to say, like, you can see I got purchase order receive, I got purchase order receive and put, and fundamentally those are different work types. So if I want to create an interleave task, then what I might do is just do receive, leave it on the dock, and then I would just have the put away would be purchase order put away would be separate, where I'm just driving up to a pallet and scanning the license plate, and that's how I initiate my work, right? And then the purchase order put away that actually might only take it from the dock to the aisle that it's going to, and I drop it off there. And someone in the VNA might be on a different piece of equipment and a different RF option to scan it yet again to put it in its final location. So we have the ability to break any sort of workflow that we want to do, either when receiving and picking and replenishment. to break up the work into separate tasks based on the types of equipment required, our labor, however we want to do it, to create a workflow specific to the building. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
While you're receiving from the RF, are you able to see, like, all the items you've received in the total quantity? Like, so when you get to close, you know what you're closing on without having to go back to a workstation?
Right now, we could add it in there. When the system was designed very intentionally to not put it on there to the end user, because we don't want, in general, from a best practice perspective, it's commonly said you might want to have multiple people receiving it, and you don't want them to be worried about what everybody else is doing, and we'll check it at the end. But ultimately, if you're single threading some receiving and things, I can understand why that would be important. That would just be data we'd have to add to the screen.
And is that addable to the configuration, or is that some kind of custom that has to be done?
It would be an extension to the screen. So it's essentially it would be an extension to the RF gun that wouldn't affect your upgrade, not core code, right?
Okay.
All right. Let's go back and just say, just so you guys understand the level of capability here. Going back to the purchase order, we actually have full inbound transportation system integrated here as well, right? So before the purchase order even shows up, after Clarity's done its work, we got a PO, it gets confirmed, you send to the vendor. Down the road, or even today, if you guys want to plan that transportation, you can come out to what's called our load planning workbench. And in this screen, we have a full transportation module. So if you have a transportation person that's looking at all the demand and trying to put together planned trucks or things of that nature, you can see here at the top, they're looking at planned sales, transfer lines, purchase orders. So if you're just trying to plan purchase lines, you can see, we've got, one open, piece of demand there. We can also filter it. So at the top, if I wanted to look at, hey, just show me the demand coming in from this Blue Horseshoe vendor, I could filter down to that demand and it would only show me that. Or maybe I only want to look at demand for the next, the next week. I could look at that and then I can start planning that to load. So you can see here the demand for the purchase order is in the middle, and then at the bottom are the trucks that I might have some that are already going, and then I have some in process. So I can essentially, check off a purchase order there, and if I do that, then I can start to add it to a load or an existing load, and then rate shop that and ask for the best carrier and so on and so forth to really drive inbound transportation with carriers and rating, and ultimately affect your landed cost, right? So there's a front end full transportation module here as well.
Steve, is there any of this product that blends itself over to another product you have that schedules our dock?
Yeah. So let's do that. So I think Angie can maybe we can find one real quick. So let's say we've planned an inbound load, maybe we can just do one here real quick. So she's assigning this purchase order to a load. You can see it's putting some quantity on it, and then ultimately it puts it on a truck. It's got cube. If I want to take that and now actually plan appointments, I go into this transportation and appointment scheduling, right? And I can drive into that and now start setting up a calendar for when, I want them to create an appointment with them. So I can create basically a tentative appointment, get it firmed through email, things of that nature. As they give you information, you can apply it. Ultimately, when this truck shows up, there's also driver check-in functionality, so I could check in a driver. If you have retention times, the clock starts, and we can send alerts out like, hey, you got 40 minutes to get this guy unloaded, things of that nature. Is that what you're asking about?
Yes.
So that appointment all goes, there's a there's full appointment scheduling, then you can go out and look at the calendar, shared calendar. Ultimately, as you update those appointments, it affects the PO time, which is great because that data will flow back out to Clarity and affect the way you buy, right? So if you have late arrivals or appointments that are changing the purchase order dates, this integrated system is going to recognize that and also give indicators to Clarity to say, hey, this thing is actually scheduled for this date when we were planning on this date, which might give a nice red flag and Clarity to say, hey, this thing's 2 weeks late. Do you want to try to buy it from somewhere else to meet the gap, right? So, when you're going all the way back into sort of transportation planning or you're getting signals from ASNs, can really help improve your MRP and your inbound processes, right?
Steve, can you show the calendar view? I just want to see what that looks like.
Yeah, let me jump out.
I don't know if we have it set up in here. We'll try to find it real
Oh,
quick.
you know what? I don't think we do. Yeah, that would be another module.
Yeah, we'll take a note of that. We'll try to give you I don't think we have any appointments in this thing, so the calendar is going to be blank.
Yeah.
So we'll take that as a note. Maybe we can, as I go into cycle counting or something, we can try to find one.
Okay, thanks.
So, yeah. All right, the other thing we wanted to show you is just like an ASN here, just like in case you guys, down the line you start getting ASNs from vendors. So again, if you get an ASN which gives us a load through integration, so that just comes into Dynamics. We can go out, so we got a purchase order here, we're going out to the load planning workbench to see the truck that it's coming in on. I can see that truck, and then it has an appointment, and then I can go to the packing structure, which actually shows me, instead of me signing a license plates to it, you can see the lines at the bottom, license plates from the vendor already labeled potentially, and I can use their license plates in receiving. So when I start scanning in, all I'm doing is scanning their LPN, which would feed me right into the receiving process. Make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions on inbound?
What I'm wondering is our storage. So right now we have every single item possible that the customer could bring in, and then our receiver chooses what does arrive, or they scan and only uses what the items that came on that truck.
She's talking about 3PL, Steve.
Yeah.
And then it's an open-ended PO, and then it just automatically, once the receiver closes that PO, another PO is populated from that, a duplicate PO. Mm-hmm. So what would you propose in your system?
So, Steve, we do not have the inbound customer fill out an inbound PO exactly to what's coming in. We just have all their items, and we choose from the truck what came in and the quantity. Is there something that you can help us with on that?
Yeah, I thought we went through that. Yeah,
well,
I thought we went through that.
I think what Sarah's saying specifically, Steve, is we're going to put everything they have on the PO.
Hundreds of items with limited quantity.
Even if that's not coming in, is that capable on your system?
Yeah, I mean, so when Michael, maybe that, because there was a lot of in and out that day, Michael went through this with whoever was in the room, but we have this concept called blanket POs, right?
Okay.
Let me see and essentially, what we were talking about with this particular area was that we would set up a blanket PO for whoever that was, with all of the items on it, with whatever quantities we wanted to put for the year or whatever it was. hold on, let me see if I can find my sourcing and procurement here. Give me 1 second. Well, it's going to take me a second. Oh, purchase, because I'm using the wrong term, so that would be nice if I actually used the right term. Purchase agreement, sorry, not blanket's my term. So in our purchase agreements, if I created one out here, I'd put all the items out here, and then what you do is we can go release essentially a purchase order from here that's specific, like release the order on to that day, and then we can receive against it. So we can create a function like that where we figure out what's actually going to be here, or sort of receive off of this, and we might have to do a little bit of work on that to be able to have it just scan in and create the release automatically. But we'll be able to sort of have a purchase agreement, and then kind of, multiple releases of that, based on what it is. So, I don't have a silver bullet for not having any indication of what's coming to you, other than sort of leveraging the multi-tiered capabilities in here, and then setting those up, and then automating it through the receiving process is what we'd have to do. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, and then in your purchase agreement, you could go in here and see all of everything that came in off of it, every time. So you kind of have a nice double hierarchy of things. It would be nice to track it all. It's going to give you sort of a checkbook of receiving too at the end of the year. So. Before we move off of this, I did want to let me just go into a couple of things here from a Power BI perspective. So as you look at the system, let me go to my workspaces, and I'm just going to go to sort of my workspace. So if I go into just WMS, so these are sort of views that you get out of the box. So you talk about inbound and vendors. These are this is like essentially some out of the box reporting and things that gets put in there. So I can look at day-to-day sort of what's coming in for it. I can kind of get my time down to just today, but I can see how many, what do I have left to do, what's still out there, what's my rate. Remember I showed you guys what was, we were tracking all the times. And then, I get nice stats of who's the fastest. Angie's by far the fastest. Put away we have here on the laptop, and then by product, by product line, things of that nature. So this type of view just comes out of the box, and then what we do is empower you guys to build your own types of things. One of the things I wanted to show you really quick is see if I can, do one of those for you. So like we were talking about, I didn't have a chance to show you this last time, but here's a super rudimentary, view, but to show you how this works to the end user and how we would enable you guys to start investigating data is like, we'll give you a workspace like this with all of the work, and essentially you guys can come in here and start, building your own capability. So, as you look at, this type of thing, I could say, hey, it's gonna be weird on me with the sizing, isn't it? So I could say, hey, I want to look at this by, the first thing I want to do is look at this by work type. So I'll just throw this on my dashboard. It'll put that out there. And then I can say, hey, when I look at work type, I'm going to make that a little filter. And then, so that way I only pick work for picking or put away. And then I might take, so then I may take in another grid. I may say, I'm going to do this by user. And I want to say for user, I'm going to look at, you know, total work performed and maybe, you know, these some other things that come in, you know, my total rate. So now I've got that in here. So it's basically building out, and maybe I want to make that some sort of bar graph, or actually I have 3 things on there, so that doesn't make sense. But you can see, like, I can actually start creating my own sort of visibility into, so I got two metrics on here, you know, but I can start building my own metrics just by that. Maybe I want to, you know, create a date filter or different types of things. You can build these things, and ultimately all I do with this is I can publish, you know, save these and publish these as dashboards, which then you can incorporate into Dynamics. So, like I was trying to tell you guys when I was there, we didn't necessarily have like raw data like this, but you know, there's not technical training here. It's just, you know, going through and understanding the data elements available, and then sort of combining them on a sort of a template, and then putting them out there to look at. So hopefully that kind of brings that conversation to view there, is that, you know, this is stuff that you guys can do for sure. Make sense?
Yeah, it's nice. I like it.
Doing that. All right. So, Angie, if you want to drive back in there, I think, actually, I'm just going to do one thing. Let's talk a little bit. The other thing I was going to show really quick is, so that purchasing thing made a decision, right? It actually made a choice about where to put the product. So we have this thing, we have 2 things that I want to talk about. The first thing is called location directives, and essentially this is our rules hub, right? And we have rules for every type of transaction in the system. So sales, purchasing, whatever it is, you know, I can go through and I can look at this, my rules. So my rules for purchase orders, the system, down the side here is each of the rules. So I have, you know, basically different ones in play, and the system is going to go through the sequence of rules in order to try to find one that works. So the first thing it does is says, okay, it starts at the top, and the first thing it does is it looks at what this thing called edit query. And what it's doing is, when we set up your rules for put away, all we're doing is we're setting up, that's a bad example, we're setting up essentially the, you know, what qualifies this rule to be used. In this case, it's everything. Let me see if I've got one with the actual stuff in here. But the idea here is, you know, when I set up this query, it's basically things like, okay, if the purchase order, well, in this case, I have, you know, whatever it is, if the item master says, if I want to look at items and it's in a specific, you know, A, B, C, D classification of A. So maybe I create a rule for only A movers, right? That's what I just did. So it's basically users basically selecting from any attribute that is available in your ERP system. So most WMSs, if they're third party, are only slaves to the master data they get. You may get one attribute to drive put away. What you get in Dynamics is I have the entire item master, all the data on the purchase order, all the data on the vendor, all the data on the load available to drive a rule. And then essentially you create that rule, and if the conditions are met, it'll actually continue on and say, this one's the one I want to use that's going to drive how the put away is going to work. So again, you know, the zone, the type of vendor, is it a fixed location, is it a 3PL business or not, whatever the rules are that we want to use to drive our strategy, we lay those down in here and the system will follow. The second thing that happens, go ahead.
You might be getting right to this, but does it look at the cube and the size of the bay as well and match it to the size of the bay?
Exactly. So the second layer is to say, okay, I'm using this rule, now what? Well, now what is, what's the next thing I want to look at? In this case is I may do something different if I'm receiving by pallet versus case versus unit, right? And so you can see at the bottom there, I'm actually changed my strategy based on the three. So if I'm a pallet, right, I might go to bulk, we'll get into this a little bit more, and then the floor. If I'm a case, I may go to my flow rack to see if it's open before I go to the rack. If I'm an each, I want to go to my shelf, right? So my strategy is different based on what I'm getting and receiving. The next thing is to say, when I look at when I go, okay, I know it's a pallet, now what? Well, what's my strategy? The first thing is I'm looking at fixed locations in bulk, and then I'm going to consolidate to where that item already exists. The system itself will ensure fit based on cube if it's set up that way as well. So it's going to go through and try to find something that fits, and then I can actually use edit query here that even though when I say bulk, I'm actually looking at locations in these profiles, but I can set up whatever, location ranges or whatever it is that I'm actually looking at. So you can see you can set up a pretty, go ahead.
Just maybe just to use this as an example, like if you're first in, first out, and you have product going to a pick bay, is there any way you use the system to ensure that the oldest product goes out first, is in tune with how it reaches the pick bay?
Yeah, so again, right now I'm on purchasing, and based on the product, I may put it away with a specific maybe all my lot controlled products. I have a particular strategy of how the product flows from the reserve to pick location that ensures that. But on the sales side as well, where I'm actually writing rules for sales orders, my strategy down here is, I have a strategy down here that allows me to say, am I doing FIFO, FIFO, whatever it is, am I rounding up, rounding down? So, in terms of the strategy, in terms of allocation, we can do that, as we do sales order sort of allocation down to the location level. So we kind of use all these rules in conjunction to drive, the overall strategy as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, although I don't know if I heard how you'd use the system to do what I described. It's kind of like when it's not like a single answer, right? It's like, okay, so for instance, let's just talk it through. So if I have a lot controlled product and I'm bringing it in, and let's say I have a rack reserve and then I have a forward picking location, and then if I bring it in and my strategy allows me to fill the picking location because it's empty and not put it in reserve first, now potentially my picking location has both, to my put away rules, now I've allowed, more recent dates in the picking location than I have in my rack reserve, right? So now on my sales side, if I really want to drive first in, first out, then I kind of have to look at both of those at the same time and then drive me to the proper place to get it. So what I'm saying is, if I were to lay down a strategy for a product, in reality, what I would do in that case is on the put away side, drive it to rack first, always, and then drop it down so I can drive my FIFO through replenishment. So I'm always have the most recent stuff in the picking location, and then my sales strategy is just to pick the most recent stuff in my forward bins that I may have multiple, and I only have to look there. So whenever you say I want to drive a FIFO strategy, it encompasses both put away and picking if you look at it from an entire building perspective. Does that make sense? Okay, yep.
And so that's why we can't, you have to look at this when we come in and help you lay down your rules. we'll talk through that and like what, different products you may have different strategies, right? And we can lay those different strategies down in the rules.
It seemed to me that the only way you could do it is by pushing your pick bay to 0, which is a problem, right? Because you end up with a mixed older and newer product in the pick bay. So it's almost, I was trying to think if there was a rule that would allow you to do that without, pushing your pick bay to 0, where you end up with no product. Like in your pick bay, it just depends if I have multiple lots or multiple dates in one pick bay, you could drive someone to go pick a specific dated product, but then you're going to slow down productivity because they're going to be searching for something, right? So it's also about footprint of warehouse, right? If you have the footprint to keep things separate, then it's easy. If you don't, like you need some high density storage, meaning you have to mix things, then certainly, there's some give and pull there, and there's not a systematic silver bullet to what we're talking about, right? Yeah, you can keep rolling. It was just an example. That would be.
Okay. All right. So let's go into inventory.
Sharing my screen. Okay, should we jump into cycle counting stuff?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so jumping into a bit of cycle counting here. The first thing I'll show is a cycle count plan configuration. So here's where we can configure how we're going to generate cycle counts. So we're going to look at A items, A movers, or we're going to look at specific locations, specific item types, zones, and how often days between the cycle counting and the maximum number of cycle counts that we want to generate so that we can make sure that we can cycle count. For instance, if you want to do like a full count to the warehouse over 3 months, these types of things determine, the setup determines how we can do that. So basically there's just, on top here you can see there's a query for locations, and down below, not quite sure why it's not showing up here, but normally there's a line here that tells, okay, this is how we define the products that we're going to cycle count, and then ultimately we can manually kick this off. We can have a scheduled job that does this, or using exceptions, maybe while we're picking the work, we can kick off some cycle counts as well. So if I jump over to my work screen, as you can see, this is showing all my types of work, but I'm just going to choose one here. So here's a cycle count that's been generated for a particular location. Item number is blank because we want it to be blind. We don't want the system to tell us what the item number is, although that is configurable. And then ultimately we can jump into the mobile device to execute on the cycle count.
What generates the cycle count?
Yeah, so we have basically, so if you go back to the rules there, so what she was kind of trying to show you here is there's a couple of things. We can generate, basically, we can lay down a plan that allows you to say, hey, I want to count my A's, B's, C's, this is just an example, a certain number of times a year or a week, and I can handle this many tasks every day, and the system will wake up and generate that work and put it out on the floor, and that'll be out there every day. There's also what we would call threshold or sort of process-based cycle counts. So one of the things we could do during sales picking is say, hey, if the location goes empty, take the opportunity, or maybe down to a few units, take the opportunity to count because those are free counts, right? So pick to empty is a free count opportunity. So we can incorporate that into sales picking. Or for instance, if I'm doing put away and I want to look for, and the user asks to look for an alternate location, that tells me maybe they couldn't get to the location they wanted to go to, so we generate a cycle count. So what you're looking at here is like essentially a job that would typically just generate those every day, but we also have sort of incident-based cycle counts that can get created as well. And then, cycle counts have a priority. A lot of times the planned daily ones will be at a lower priority than the incident-based ones, things of that nature. Make sense?
Okay. Yep, perfect.
And then if you look at the cycle count itself, I don't know if we have an open one out there, Angie. We can go in and look at So if you have users out there counting, and we can just go into the reconcile screen here. Of one of these, there's a way to drive in, and we can basically. So if I go count, and then I have a user that's not allowed to essentially prove those automatically. When we go in, you can go in and then basically go into an approval screen from there. So if you look at the work, do you have any open?
We have some open work that I might be able to.
Yeah. So we don't have any pending review right now, but essentially you can go out there and approve and deny those. But one of the keys is with cycle counts is that in our system, because the inventory is single source of the truth of inventory, that when we create these cycle counts based on the plan, Angie mentioned like, hey, we don't have to put the item on it. That's important because we create that cycle count work. Your location could could turn over 4 times by the time the person got there, right? And so when the cycle counter is actually at the location counting at that point in time, system knows what should be there right now. And so the counts are always based on that. So a couple of key concepts here is you don't have to shut down to do counting, right? There's no shutdown. You send people out there while work's going on, it's not a problem because the system knows what should be there at all times, and their count is live against what's happening. So ultimately, they do that count. Now, you don't have to necessarily post that right away. I can send that to a reconciliation, which we talked about, and then have managers go through and potentially ask for a recount or approve them, which ultimately will post as an adjustment against your inventory. Make sense?
Yes.
All right, let's talk about replenishment. We have a couple of different methodologies for replenishment. If we look at our replenishment templates. So the first thing is wave-based replenishment. We're going to talk about the wave in a second. You guys have waves today, right? You run waves in the current WMS?
I'm not sure we call it that.
A plan, or like basically you run a group of orders and create the work against them? Yes.
Generate the replen.
What do you call? Let's forget about replen for a second. What do you when you're about to do outbound and you run a group of orders for all the nightly orders and you're creating the work for that? What do you call that process? Is that a plan, a wave, or does every order allocate individually?
It's just a planned replenishment.
It's a wave. We batch a bunch of routes and creates waves to pick. Yeah.
Okay, so you have like a batched. Okay, so when we talk about wave and dynamics, what we're talking about is essentially we have, like if you look at your outbound work, you send some things to routing, it's come back, maybe we want to wave the first 10 trucks. We can do that, and then it'll actually, when we wave it, that's when we actually commit inventory to the orders at a location level. But we can also do things like replenishment. So if that wave, that batch drove a picking location to 0, we can create replenishment as part of that wave, so we know that there's work out there. It's going to be required to drop pallets down to the picking location, right? So we call the first type here wave demand, and essentially those will run with the wave every day, and it'll create the replenishment work to continue to fill the picking location throughout the night when it's required, based on what the overall demand is. Okay. The other types of replenishment is min-max sort of things. So this is what you were talking about, like, all right, so I can run this on, like, maybe in the morning, night's over, I just want to fill up my picking aisle. I can say, hey, anything below 50%, in this location running, create replenishment work to do, fill up of all of my picking locations, which it'll create work to go drop, to do that replenishment work and drop pallets down. So you can drive that by your minimum quantity, your minimum percent, or item by item, or aisle by aisle. So maybe you have like, hey, a lot of times what we'll have is we'll have a rule for your, higher volume SKUs, if you have like a 3 pallet pushback, sort of area with higher volume SKUs, maybe we do those first and then prioritize the rack, the floor location second, and then some other locations third. We can run these at different times, generate work, put it on the floor, track it, and then run the next one. So these types of jobs are out here for you guys to run, to generate stuff based on some thresholds to drive sort of that, prep for the night, if you will.
On a wave, is that a specific event, or is it because the inventory is live? As an example, orders are coming in today that are going to ship out tonight. There's orders that came in 3 days ago that are going to ship out tonight. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. Will that constantly send that work out, or is it an event where now we create this wave and do it, or is it just live?
It's either way. So we're going to get into outbound next, but essentially, the waves can be as you talk about efficiencies, the more you can batch, right? The more I can batch orders together and say, hey, I wait till there's this volume of orders or this many lines or this amount of queue before I wave. Then you get the efficiency of volume in that to create replenishment more strategically, right? And work more strategically. Maybe I could batch pick some things and things of that nature. So that's the capability, but you also have the capability and other types of, so maybe you have emergency orders and things where if emergency order comes down, I just want that to go create work as it comes down, right? So we can actually mix all those strategies and our overall wave strategy, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But so the answer is we can do both.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, I guess we could walk through the transaction of pick and put on replenishment. Do you guys want to see that, or can we move on into sort of the waving piece of this? Outbound.
I've got a good grip on this. I think you can move forward. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things I would like to do, so we're going to get into outbound here, and we're going to kind of talk about the scenarios. But the first thing I wanted to do, if I can pull it up here, let's see if I can find it. All right, so let's jump in. We'll kind of talk about the concepts here of the sort of order flow. So essentially we have sales orders, and Sales order, if we go into sales orders, if we go into sort of the warehouse piece, one of the things that happens at the highest level, we have orders coming in, every single day. And sales orders come in, and when we release those to the warehouse, what happens is those things become shipments. So we have this process that we need to talk about first that's called, release to warehouse. And so this process, release to warehouse, we can run manually or we can schedule it, every few minutes. But ultimately, the purpose of it is to extract the lines from the sales order that we want to send to the warehouse for fulfillment. So, for instance, a good example of how you would use this is, when a sales order comes in, if you remember, we talked a lot about inventory reservation to the sales order, right, at the warehouse level. Like, hey, I have this amount available, what is available to promise, etc. That's occurring all the time. But at some point, we want to release to warehouse. Now, for you guys, that may be at cutoff every night. So we just do a big batch release to warehouse. What that does is it actually creates shipments that the warehouse would fulfill. One of the benefits of release to warehouse in batch like that is if our customer orders like 25 times during the day, which we've all seen that, right? It'll actually combine those things, if they're allowed to, into a single shipment, as opposed to picking 20 orders because they ordered 10, 20 times, right? So, the timing of release to warehouse is important because we typically wait as long as we can before we do that, and then we can combine those things into a single shipment to the customer. We could still invoice them separately for each of their 20 orders or give them one big invoice, but it allows us to create sort of this fulfillment piece. The other part about release to warehouse is that the other rules come into play. So are they ship complete or not? If they're a ship complete customer, maybe when I hit release to warehouse, if I don't have inventory for one of the lines, maybe I don't create anything for the shipment because I'm a ship complete customer overall. If I do allow that, then only the lines I have inventory for will go on the shipment. The rest of it will stay open on the sales order and potentially ship later if I allow it. And if they allow back orders, we ship it later. So ultimately, what goes to the warehouse is what the ERP system thinks we have inventory for. And because we share a single database, that's usually fairly accurate, right? Because what we're reserving the orders is what's actually available. So we're releasing to warehouse what we have available. That shipment should be specific to, what we have. Now, some customers, our customers, they actually want to send the lines down that they don't have inventory for because they may show up during the night. They're a late receipt. And we can do that as well and cross-dock those into the plan. So release to warehouse is a really big concept here. There's nothing to it. If you click on it on an order, all it does is says, if I click on it on a sales order, all it does is says, do you want to release to warehouse? But ultimately what it's done is it's now moved that to another entity that we call a shipment. And if we drive into a shipment, we can see now that's a secondary entity, and your warehouse folks only deal with shipments. Does that all make sense?
Steve, can you release all shipments by date?
Yes. So if we go to the release to warehouse job, I can actually create a lot of different criteria. So as a strategy, you may allow customer service to hit release to warehouse like Angie just did if it's an emergency order, and that order might flow down to the warehouse, wave, and print without anybody touching it because it has a particular type. But all my batch orders, I may just have a release to warehouse job that only releases stuff that's for delivery tomorrow, and we run that. We have a clerk run that when they shut down the phones at 5:30. They just press the button, and then all the shipments get created and sent to RoadNet, and we can automate that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So again, we have two different entities here, and it's nice because the customer service and the warehouse are actually dealing with different things. The warehouse, it's a nice pass-off, right? when the order becomes a shipment, now that's the warehouse responsibility to fulfill the shipment. Sales orders are customer service, right? Once I release an order to a shipment, I can't go in and change quantities on a line. There's some rules there where we kind of, up to a point where it's starting picking and things, we can get into that. But ultimately, the high level thing is once it becomes a shipment, customer service can't change it. They just have to add a new line to existing order or create a new order. So there's a nice division. Since we're all in one system here, we kind of create some nice divisions between the two things. Make sense?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, so ultimately, and I'll just I'm going to throw this up here, Angie. I'm going to go ahead and present again. The other thing that I wanted to show really quick is so I don't know if you guys can read this, but, I showed this when I was there the other day of hey, this is what's happening, right? Orders coming in from different places. Can you guys see my screen?
I think it's still sharing mine.
Okay. Oops, forgot to do that. So I just wanted to walk you through this before we start waving. So ultimately, orders are coming in through different places into Dynamics 365. We're taking orders. If there's issues, they're going to credit hold, getting released, standing back in line, and inventory reservation up here is taking place at what we call a warehouse level. Do we have inventory, right? But ultimately, at some point, we're going to do that release to warehouse right here, right after the cutoff, at which point we have shipments. We're going to send that to routing. Routing is going to come back and update our shipments with the route stop. And then we're gonna start waving, right? We're gonna actually process those in WMS. What we also could do is, like I was saying earlier, if I had an emergency order, I could release it from customer service, auto wave, and then start picking and waving in Dynamics, right? So that's really kind of, after that cutoff, we create that shipment, we send to routing, it comes back, and now we're ready to wave. So we were going to kind of pick it up from we got routed orders, routed shipments inside of Dynamics on a truck, and we were going to go wave them to create the work. And essentially what the waving process does is it's going to commit inventory to those shipments at a location level now. Not only, so the inventory is already held at a warehouse level because of the first reservation. The second reservation process that occurs in the wave is actually saying, you're going to get this line on this shipment from this location, right? So that's the second thing that occurs and work gets created. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now Angie's going to pick it up here, and we're gonna walk through our scenario. So what we have is we got a couple of trucks here with different zones. We got a couple of sales orders. And I guess, can we start on that manifest screen?
Yep.
So here's our manifest screen. So essentially, when we start the night, we'll have a route. We got BHS Route 1, and underneath the route, we've got certain orders and certain sales orders, could have multiple, right, where it's going to get delivered. So in my case, I've got 2 stops, 2 different customers, some different things on it. So this is what kind of comes to us, after we get some routing back. Now, we haven't waved it in our case yet, so what we'll show you now is we're going to start with essentially that waving process. So let's go to, the actual all waves. So if I was going to wave manually, the first thing I would do is I'm going to start a new wave, right? Come in here, I'm going to give it a nice description so I know maybe it's hey, first 10, I can give a description to manage to it. First 10 trucks for, today's date, 8/3, right? So I'll do that. And I have a wave template which tells us how it's going to behave. We'll talk about that in a second. So we'll just pick a standard one and hit OK. So what the system's going to do is starting a wave, and now what I want to do is I'm going to actually add shipments to it. Now, we're doing this manually. This can be automated. And then it'll show me all the available orders, all the available shipments out there that I could add to this wave. So in this filter code at the top, I can say, like for you guys, it would be sort of, maybe it would be the first 10 routes for tomorrow. Like I would create some templates of filters, right, of how I wanted to pare down the pool. So I can do, and again, that's edit query, any sort of attributes of the pool. So like for you guys, it'd be shipments for delivery tomorrow. Maybe it's the first 10 routes, and then it's going to limit down what shipments that means. And then I'm going to select those and add them to a wave. As I select them and add it to my wave, it's going to tell me the cube, right? So at the top there, it keeps nice metrics. So if you guys have some idea of like how much work you can do, how much cube you can handle per hour, we can sort of manage that. And then all of these shipments will be managed overall to this total wave that we're going to go pick, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. So Angie, you've got one that we've already waved out here, and maybe you can kind of walk us through what the scenario behind it.
Yeah. So we have multiple orders across a couple trucks and a few different stops, and ran all of the orders through a wave through various configurations. The system has actually built loads by route and sorted by stop descending. So each work unit ultimately that was created represents different routes and picking in different zones. So basically what we have across all of these orders are picking against a few different zones. In my case, we have like a dry goods zone, a chilled zone, and a frozen food zone. And so what we're doing is we built the work based on different zones, dry, chilled, or frozen, and then we ordered by stop descending within those zones. So each work unit that was eventually created here actually represents one pallet that we're building as we're picking. So you can see there's multiple sales orders, and I have a work pool ID to designate what zone we're picking from, so we can easily see.
Yeah, so let's just look at this concept. So the system is automatically grouping the work across orders per route into sort of these work headers that with details and picks and puts and things inside of them. So let's take a step back now and say, like, how did that work? How did we get that, right? So we're going to come back to this in a second, but in another screen, let's just go into the work templates. So essentially what we're configuring is, number one, remember the rules and directives were telling me where to allocate from. But the next thing that we're doing is that we're creating a work template that's telling me how, when I look at a wave, how do I group, sort, and break all of the picks that we have. So in our edit query here on dry pallet, what it's doing, what we've configured in our little rules is say, hey, look at all the products of, you only use this rule when it's of type dry. So easy enough, it's going to group pallets by type dry. Okay, so we got that done. So it's going to separate, we're going to create a rule for dry, frozen, chilled. Perfect. The second thing we're going to do is it's going to actually sort it. When we look at the dry, we're actually going to sort it by the load, the truck, and the stop, right? And then we're going to break by stop, okay? So, or volume, right? So it's actually sorting all the picks by those two attributes. And the second thing it's doing is it's actually breaking by a cube. So I'm saying, hey, build a pallet up to this cube for dry so it's like it's reading through the picks in terms of this route, then in descending stop sequence, and then I'm allowed to go across stops up to potentially this cube, and then it's going to create a pallet of work that I can go pick, bring to the staging location, or bring and directly load. So you can see the system. We're using rules in the system to leverage the attributes that are in here to build the pallet work that we're creating. Did I lose you guys, or does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. All right, so we'll go back to our scenario again.
That would also allow you to do like a once through or a
We got a question, Steve, hold on.
The Z picking or the?
Yeah, does it Z-pick, or is it going down one side of the aisle and back up the other?
Oh, so that can be a part of that as well, right? So if I were on it, I didn't sort that by the location, but I could sort that by the location sequence. You know, some people have been in some facilities where, like, on the location, they numbered it wrong 20 years ago, and they have a secondary sequencing on the location table, and we sequence by that. Or we do it by this location sequence in this zone, then this zone. So we have any attribute on how we serpentine after that. So that's a good question. Yeah.
So we pick sometimes by stop, by zone. Stop first, then by location. And then other ones, we mix the pallet all by location, meaning stop
Perfect.
really doesn't, okay.
So in here, I assume that's like customer based maybe, is that right?
It's by zone in the truck. We don't want our
Yeah,
drivers sorting through the frozen, but in the dry, we have them select the order.
So you can see here, I can have different rules for dry than frozen, right? So I could, you know, when I create my work, so the dry one's separate from the frozen. Like some of our customers are like, hey, if we're building pallets, like, hey, this customer or this driver wants a smaller cube. So I can go down and say, you know, this driver this time I'm going to build it in a different way, right? I can go down to very specific, I can have whatever number, I mean, obviously the less rules, the easier to maintain, right? But we have the flexibility to create as many rules as we need to support the business.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yes.
What about our crushables?
Yeah. Mark is saying
so
crushables.
So those products, you know, again, that's just sort criteria there, right? So if I actually want to create my serpentine not by location sequence, but by like a crushable code first, maybe I have 1s and 2s or 1s, 2s, and 3s, and I want to pick on my base layer 1s before the 2s, before the 3s, we can do that too.
Okay.
Okay. So back on the work, we can see lots of different pallets here to be picked. Let me just scroll to the right really quickly. As we said, one of the things we broke the work by was volume of 10,000. So we can see total volume listed here as well. So that's kind of handy to see per work unit or pallet here. So beyond that, since these are generated, they're open, we're ready to pick. So jumping back into the RF here, back on my main menu, I'm just going to go into my outbound. And again, lots of different ways that we could initiate picking on this. I'm going to do a simple user-directed. We could have this be system-directed. Voice, that's a good point, yeah. Grouping as well. Just to show you a fairly simple example, though, I'm just going to do a simple pick for one of these. So to initiate this, I'm going to go ahead and scan the work ID, which could be barcoded on a pick sheet. And just like purchase orders, it directs me to a location. So on the sales side, it's going to direct me to this location to pick from. So I'm going to assign a target license plate to this, which is a tracking license plate throughout the warehouse, just so that we can see where our inventory is. That can be system generated. Now it's asking me for the batch number because this is a lot tracked item. So what batch do I have for this? Let's see. Okay, I have this one. Perfect. All right. So I think it moved me to my next item here. So now, if I go back to the work screen and I refresh.
By the way, you see where it says locked by there? The system always knows where the inventory is, right? So right now it's on Angie's fork, right? She's picking it. So the inventory itself, if I went and looked at it, would be tracked to AKS on her fork. You can see right now we're looking at the work. If I drilled down from the wave down into the work, I can see that this pallet's being picked by Angie, and you can see where she is in the process, right? She picked the first one, but now she's being told to go to the second one. We're doing pick, and then we're going to put it to stage. You can see the flow at the bottom. Our flow in this case, the workflow, is pick, put it to stage, and then I'll have a loader load it separately with a different piece of equipment. So, and that's why we separated the stage and the load into the bay and through the bay door, is because we wanted to have that be separate people, but we could make it the same person. Make sense?
All right, let me find my menu. Here we go. All right, so system's prompting me for my second pick, so I'm just going to go ahead and pick that quickly. All right, so now I'm being prompted for batch. I have some bread that I need to get again, so I'm just I think I can just put the same batch item. I think I have enough in there. All right, perfect. So now that all my lines are picked, now I've picked up all my items, the system has directed me to put it down at the staging location. So you can see a description of multiple items here and the total quantity if that's necessary to see. Once I put that down, that's it as far as my picking tasks go. And if I refresh the work, we can see it's still in process. It's not completed yet, but all of my picks have been done. And now this inventory is sitting at the staging location. Excuse me, it's also not locked by me anymore, and so it's available for the loader to pick up.
If you go into those picks again, you have all sorts of, you think about Power BI and the metrics that you can start doing. If you go into every pick, inside of that sequence is tracked separately. So, I know when they pick the first one, the second one, the third one, how much time in between. I have all my date stamps, right? When this thing started, when this particular item got picked, the actual time between the last one. So I've got, if you start thinking about the metrics that you can create from this, you're, using that Power BI form I showed you a little while ago, there's obviously a lot of capabilities there.
Your picking has the capability of picking from rack reserve for partial pallets?
Yep. So if we look at our location directives, right? Maybe what I would do, like if certain SKUs, if I didn't want to do replenishment and I just wanted to, create a pick rules that said for certain SKUs, I'm gonna pick them from the forward locations only. And then if it's not there, the second sequence would be pick from rack reserve for cases. We can create sequences like that so that you would get, and then you'd have different types of work. You'd have basically cherry picker work for rack reserve that would be different than stuff you could put on something that you could drag, fork, that you could drag a jack that you could drag along on the ground and pick off the floor, right? So we can separate that work as well.
And you also have random weights at also receiving and picking?
Yeah, full catch weight support, so we can capture on inbound, if we're doing it for each case, we can do that. For each case, we can also, if you are able, if just doing averages is okay, and you have like a whole pallet, you get a pallet and you get a pallet weight, we can extrapolate and average the weight down to make it quicker, but both of the above, and then capture it again on the outbound side. With random weights, you also have this idea of tagging. So if your customer is giving you a serial ID on the case that represents the weight, we can import those from a file so that you can just scan the barcode as opposed to typing in weights and things of that nature. So we can do that through barcodes as well and use tags. And typically, what we do is we just capture the weight on the inbound side, and then we capture that tag on the outbound side. We don't know exactly where it is in between, so you don't have to move every case if you're doing replenishment and stuff. And then you know what the customer knows what weights they got, and if they get charged per weight, you get all that tracked through the system. So like we're in our last 10 minutes here, guys. I just want to be sensitive of time. Is there other things that you guys would like to see here, or you have overall questions? What can we help answer here in the last few minutes?
I just have one more, Steve. Do you have a loading, truck loading app in this that we can scan the pallet and scan the truck as it goes on the truck? And can you print out a truck manifest?
The answer is to both of those. Yeah, so you're looking at Angie's screen here. That stage to bay door, that part of the work that's left is sales loading. So that's actually assigned to a loader. So if we created an option called sales loading, and in reality now I can pick up that pallet or that work that she just finished, and now that's going to allow me to scan it. So now I'm picking it up off the stage, confirmed, got this, and now I'm loading it into a particular truck. We just call it bay door, but if you assign the load to a particular door, whatever, door 1, 2, 3, 4, we can scan it into there. We have no verification on here, but we can scan it. If you have like an overhead sign or something, require them to scan it into that as well. And that completes this work. So we should see on her screen here now, this work should go to complete. And actually it just left the screen because we're only showing open work. So that actually disappeared, that work. Now this whole thing has gone to close. One of the beauties of work is it never gets deleted, just goes to a closed status. So if you ever need to research what human being did what, where, and why, we got it all tracked like I was showing you down to the user timestamp level and to the task. And that, because it's one system, relates up to the sales order, up to the shipment, full traceability. So if I ever ran a traceability report on who got cases off what license plate, because this is all tracked from end to end, I have all that here because it's in one database. And then what was the other question you asked? You asked about
manifest.
Manifest, yeah. So there's standard bill of lading, standard manifest documents that would print from the load. We could send you some examples, but it's basically a bill of lading that we have. Most of the time we end up in reporting, there's some custom data or things that you want to see on that or the driver wants to see, and those are pretty easy to sort of tailor when you look at the report that's generated. But the starting place is sort of a bill of lading, and then but certainly there'd probably be a little bit of tailoring there for your drivers in terms of what would be displayed, for sure.
Steve, what I didn't see in there was when you are routing the trucks and you have multiple stops on pallets within different zones, when that's put together, sometimes the router has to, move some cases or make adjustments manually.
Yeah.
Is there a visual way? Did I miss that? I don't think. Is there a visual?
No, that's good. I mean, I think we talked about that when we brought up WMS the first time. It's that would be something that the visual stuff. It would be something that would be the one gap we've seen in our WMS that we have to fill. To kind of do that as a drag and drop. We don't think that's a huge issue, but certainly, I think we talked about it, that's a good call out. If you want to do sort of a drag and drop visual moving of work, we'd have to create that screen. We have a couple of food service guys that are looking at this in the same sort of position you are right now. We've already kind of designed that out, so we've got a good plan for it. But right now it'd be more sort of go into the work and on each transaction and say, hey, move this to this pallet for this pallet, as opposed to like a visual representation we don't have right now.
Okay. All right.
I have one question, and this would probably be coming from Travis. On your check digits, do you support alphanumeric instead of just numeric, and what's the length?
Check digit length? I don't know that there is one. We could look into that for you. We have 3 digits on ours. I think, there really isn't a limit on field lengths for the most part inside a system like this. So if you wanted to do 10 digits, it's just a field attribute. So at the end of the day, that's something that we can configure. And yes, it can be alpha or numeric, or both.
Thank you.
So, hopefully, guys, we kind of hit, some of the things that are important to you. I know we didn't do like a full discovery on WMS, but we've seen these business processes enough, so we took a swing at it. So hopefully we hit most of what's important to you. Anything else that we can help answer?
Pretty nice demo.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good demo.
Your voice is VocalX supported?
Yeah.
I did hear a question or half a question from Mike before about the hardware. How do we know?
By the way, Steve, there's your appointment schedule calendar. Angie found it in the meantime here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we go to just a daily view? I'm just curious what that looks like.
Day, I think you hit there. You have to find a day. Yeah.
It's probably gonna.
Basically just like Outlook.
Mm-hmm.
It's an Outlook, yeah. Yeah. Right. Weird.
Yeah. Shocking.
So I think the question, and we don't necessarily have to resolve it right here, but just the hardware that we have, if the hardware is all compatible.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should have our list from the RFP, and we just would want to ensure or confirm or deny if our hardware is fully compatible, and if not fully compatible, what hardware will we need to replace what we have for operations.
Bill, you guys want to take that one, or Mike?
Yeah, I can deliver. I can deliver bad news. Yeah.
Have we looked at it? I didn't even know if we looked at it yet. So.
Is that my role? I'm not sure why we haven't. Ed Williams. So we also sell hardware. We sell material handling. Yeah. Anyway, no, we do. We have a full service approach. I mean, if you guys ever needed help designing warehouses, conveyor sortation, any kind of automation, but we sell printers, RF. Anyway, we said that to Ed Williams, but and I thought, hey, Mike Thielen.
Yep.
We had also forwarded to you. There's all of the RF devices over the years began to be the infrastructure started to be Windows CE, and all of the Windows CE. So we looked at your devices, they're all going end of life. The native Dynamics 365 requires a Windows 10 backbone, and so there's. Sorry, is there?
No, I just was agreeing with you. Yep.
Yeah. So there's two sides of this. Your current devices are probably either already out of support or are about to be. And then the ones that you would need to run this RF framework need to be Windows 10, which none of yours are. So that was a really long way of saying currently none of your devices would support this RF framework. And I don't know what the direction is for your current provider, but nobody's going to make devices that are on CE anymore.
Correct.
So,
yeah, everybody's heading to Windows 10, but the majority are heading towards Android.
Yeah, and you should be able to use those devices with this as well. But we can I thought we did something, Mike Thielen, where they packaged up that information. Did we not send it?
No, that did not get sent.
Okay. Yeah, I had sent something to Mike, and then we had asked Ed, and that ball may have been dropped, to just give us some. So maybe take this down again, Mr. Thielen. We could give you just some, since this is probably further out, at least in our current plan. We could tell you in current state, hey, here's a handheld, here's a truck mount, like here's things that are, you know, obviously you have devices that have to be work in the freezer. So we can tell you equivalents of those and what the relative costs are. You probably know that in general anyway, but we can give that to you.
Okay, yeah, we'd appreciate it. We just want to get to the end of the line and be like, oh, you got to buy all new equipment. So need to look at everything holistically. So
yeah, we're expecting you'll probably, you know, if our timeline's right, you're probably going to have replaced it by the time you get to this with us anyway. So is our strong guess.
Yep,
would agree. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for the good demo. I think it was very helpful. We just lost a couple of our people here, so we can't really recap any further. But,
yeah,
thank you.
Greatly appreciate it. It was awesome. Thanks for all your time today. And it was nice meeting you, Angie.
Yes, thank you. Nice meeting you too.
Yeah, very nice job.
Verbally.
Yeah.
Guys, I'll get the recordings segmented out and over to you as well, same as the way we delivered the last one.
That would be awesome, because I know Travis will be chomping at the bit to view it.
All right.
All right, thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Have a good weekend.
Talk again soon.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Okay,
Have a good
take care.
weekend.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.